Why is it important to look at Yemen? Well, it's notoriously difficult to get a clear picture of what's happening in Yemen, particularly when it comes to remote parts of the country where local tribes are the key players and not the central government. And that's where most of the energy infrastructure is located. Yemen's energy sector is quite small compared to its neighbours, but it's absolutely critical for the central government and political stability. Oil and gas are expected to account for 88% of Yemen's exports and 54% of total state revenue in 2014. Yemen's a great starting point to develop a data-driven approach to security risk assessments, and by being able to develop such a granular understanding in a place as complex and opaque as Yemen, we know that we can use the same approach for basically any country in the region. Well, with the data set in this particular study, we started by identifying attack hotspots based on a statistical analysis of the IHS Foresight database of risk indicator events. This is a comprehensive list of geocoded news events and associated metadata, which a dedicated team collects on a daily basis from local news sources, which include various social media platforms. The next step is to understand what's driving these attacks, and that's where you need detailed insights into the local tribal structures. You need to understand which tribes operate where, what their particular grievances are, who they're allied with, and what their armed capabilities are. These are insights that you can only get from people with significant personal contact with tribal sheikhs and years of experience living and working with them. We've had incredible support from our network of contacts in Yemen, and this has proven extremely valuable. We've been able to produce pretty accurate figures on the number and locations of attacks, which then allowed us to compare the risks to individual pipeline sections. So for risk managers, we can tell them that more than half of all attacks were concentrated in two specific locations, 38% in Sirwa and 21% in Wadi Abida, which both affect Safer E&P's oil pipeline connecting Block 18 in Marib to the Ras Isa export terminal on the Red Sea coast. We were then able to identify which tribes are involved and what their specific motivations are for attacking the pipeline. For investors, we showed that the Masila Basin in Hadramaut province, which is estimated by the government to account for about 84% of total reserves, hadn't been blown up at all in that time frame, but that the risk of attacks is increasing as a result of localized tribal unrest and also the likelihood of a sudden insurgency in 2014. So the security risks to energy infrastructure really do differ substantially between locations. There are several converging factors that indicate an increase in the number of attacks against energy infrastructure, particularly in the first 6 months of 2014. However, we assess that these are likely to focus on symbolic targets while avoiding major structural damage or mass casualties. The key underlying drivers, severe poverty, lack of government control, and a breakdown of tribal codes, are unlikely to be addressed in 2014. We're also looking at an increase in patronage to groups that have an interest in undermining President Hadi's government, as political factions, which include the former President Saleh, position themselves for a new power-sharing agreement over the coming months. In the south, there's an ongoing military offensive against jihadists, which is increasing the frequency of attacks against oil and gas facilities, while tribal unrest in Hadramaut province and the increasingly likely sudden insurgency in 2014 mean that exports from the Masila Basin are more likely to be affected.